Will be taking a view, taking the jury to various locations. And with regard to any media coverage of a view, I am ordering the following, and I'd ask any media representatives here in court to note this, and to the extent you can communicate this to other interested media outlets, that would be appreciated. With regard to a view tomorrow, the court will permit one, I don't know if that camera is digital, but one broadcast camera serving as a pool camera available to all media outlets that may want a film. The court will permit one pool still camera and cameraman to accompany the view and be present at the view, and to the extent the media would find it of value, the court would permit a pool reporter. The pool broadcast camera, still camera, and pool reporter. To the extent you all can fit into one vehicle, that vehicle would be permitted to be part of the view entourage. I would expect that likely we will have police escort, and we will fit the pool vehicle into that escort. When we arrive at locations to be viewed, no filming of jurors is permitted at any time in any way. And when I say no filming of jurors, I suppose I should be more clear. No filming of any juror that would depict or capture their features other than perhaps from the waist down. I'm ordering that no broadcast media or no media outlet that has air capabilities are to utilize any helicopter, airplane, or other device. I suppose now we ought to include drones to attempt to take an aerial view of the view itself or the participants in the view. The media shall not be permitted to have any contact with the jurors and shall be kept at a reasonable distance from the jury and the other participants in the view. I'm told that likely we will be going to 3 or 4 different locations, and that will all take place first thing tomorrow morning. All right, with that said, by way of an order regarding media coverage of the view, let us bring our jurors in and resume the testimony. For tomorrow, and just so you're aware, tomorrow morning we will begin in the courtroom and open the session, and then we're going on a field trip, what we call a view, an opportunity for you to see certain areas, including some of the areas that have been discussed here. The Kira Lounge, there's also been reference to some streets as depicted on the exhibit number 1, and also to an area to view a vehicle. So we will be doing that tomorrow morning. I think the weather forecast is that although it's not going to be raining or snowing, it likely will be somewhat chilly. so dressed appropriately. There will be some walking, but not a great deal of walking, so you might want to wear some comfortable footwear tomorrow. So we're going to start out with that after we have assembled here, and then at the end of that viewing of areas, we'll return here and receive additional testimony. So that's the lineup for tomorrow, just so you are all aware. Let us turn now to the evidence. Mr. Hagan.
Commonwealth calls Sean Murphy.
You solemnly swear the testimony you should give this court and jury in the issue now pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant at the bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, sir.
May I begin, Your Honor?
Please.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Sean Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y.
What is your current occupation, sir?
Paramedic for the City of Boston.
How long have you been a paramedic for the City of Boston?
Paramedic coming up in 10 years.
Prior to becoming a paramedic, how were you employed?
I was still with the city, but as an EMT for about 5 years.
So how many years total have you been either an EMT or paramedic then?
Coming up in 16 years.
And is it fair to state that as a paramedic and EMT, you have specialized training put on by the City of Boston?
Yes.
And can you generally describe what training and testing you've had relative to being a paramedic or EMT in the City of Boston?
To get on the job for the City of Boston, you have to be an EMT or a paramedic to begin with. The EMT is about a 6-month certificate course, and paramedic is an additional anywhere from a year to 2 years of more intensive training.
What is your educational background, sir?
Just a high school education, and went on to be a slacker for a while, and then I became a paramedic.
And I think I interrupted you as you were going over some more of the training that you've had, sir. Can you continue?
To get on the job, you have to take more tests to get on Boston EMS, and whether you're a paramedic or an EMT, you start as an EMT. And when there's a promotional opportunity, you test for that, and then you go into, it's about 6 months of an internship to become a paramedic, which is pass-fail by the end.
And did you ultimately pass the test and become a paramedic for the City of Boston, Boston Emergency Medical Services?
I did.
And during your many years as either a paramedic or an EMT with the City of Boston Emergency Medical Services, approximately how many scenes have you responded to for what's called penetrating trauma, that being gunshot wounds or stab wounds?
Too many to count. There's hundreds, I'd say.
So I'm going to call your attention now to a particular early morning, that being July 16th, the year 2012. It was a Monday morning at approximately 2:30 a.m. Were you working that night, sir?
I was.
Who were you working with?
My partner at the time, Dave Chaffee.
And were you both paramedics at that time?
Yes.
Were you in a paramedic ambulance which had advanced life support machinery?
We were. I was assigned truck paramedic 1.
At some point, sir, did you as a one of the paramedics in Paramedic 1 receive a radio call or transmission to be dispatched to a certain location?
We did.
And where was that, sir?
It's a corner of Herald and Sherman.
Where were you when you got that radio call?
I believe we're at the Boston Medical Center.
About how long did it take you to get to the scene?
We weren't in the truck at the time, but I'd say about 3 to 4 minutes. It wasn't long.
Sir, I'm calling your attention now to, I'm placing on the screen in front of you exhibit number 7. When you got to the intersection of the intersection of Shawmut and Herald Street, within a few minutes, as you indicated, what did you observe when you got there?
That vehicle, it was facing us because we came up from the south. And there were 2 victims, one in the passenger, one in the driver's seat, and my supervisor was outside the vehicle.
And your supervisor, who was that, sir?
Mike Bossy.
And just so we're clear for the record, exhibit 7 that's on the screen now, is this the actual angle that you came in from?
Yes.
And parked your car?
Our truck, yes.
Truck, I'm sorry. Now, when you first arrived, were police officers there as well?
I remember seeing one, but there may have been more.
Did you see any other injured parties, sir?
After I was walking away from the vehicle, I saw one person walking around that appeared injured.
Okay, before we get to that, when you first arrived, you indicate that your supervisor, Superintendent Bossy, was there. Did you make any observations about the car and whether or not it was in gear or park or the keys were in ignition?
Not at the time, but when I went to the passenger side and I noticed that it was in park. I don't recall if it was on or off.
Now, when you went to the passenger side, did your partner go to the driver's side?
Yes.
What did you observe when you went to the passenger side, sir?
There was a male victim, and he had appeared to be a gunshot wound to his temple and his mandible, and he had no signs of life.
Did you make any other observations about gunshot wounds other than the temple and the mandible?
He also, his head was forward a little. He also had what appeared to me as an exit wound, and there was also a hole going through the headrest. That was kind of in line with the hole in the back of his head.
Did you see any signs of life of this individual?
I did not.
At that point, did you declare him to be non-viable?
We did, or I did, yes.
Did you see anything relative to something to do with a gunshot wound to his head that would be indicative of an individual being non-viable?
Well, he had penetrating trauma to the head, and he also had gray matter and bright skull fragments on the headrest.
What does gray matter mean, sir?
Parts of the brain.
And once you observe something like gray matter, is that significant for the determination of
yes,
whether
they are non-viable.
And you saw that with this patient, this
Yes.
individual? And did you declare him non-viable at that point, sir?
At that point, yes.
After declaring him non-viable, did you step away from the car at that point?
I did.
And were police officers still on scene?
There was one there that I know of.
What observations do you make of any other injured persons? I think you referenced one earlier.
There was one in the driver's seat.
And what did you notice about him?
He appeared in cardiac arrest. He was extremely diaphoretic. I don't recall his injuries.
Diaphoretic means what, sir?
Sweaty.
And what about outside of the car? You indicated there was somebody else who had some injury.
Yeah, I don't recall what the injury was. I believe it was up to his arm. But he was standing off over on the sidewalk by the edge of the bridge.
Sir, at some point, did something happen on the scene that caused you and your partner, Mr. Paramedic Chaffee, to get a sheet from your truck?
There was as we were walking back towards our truck, we noticed some people and there was the press there. So we typically, in a scene like this, if there was a jumper that landed in the street, we put a sheet over it. There's someone non-viable shot in the middle of the street, we put a sheet over them. It's just to preserve their dignity. You know, everyone has a high-def phone camera in their pocket, so we do it for them.
And did you and Paramedic Chaffee get a sheet from the truck and place it over the car?
We did. We placed it over the windshield.
Is that what we see here in exhibit number 7, of that sheet there?
Yes.
Sir, the sheet that you used, where did that come from?
Our truck.
And where do the sheets come from that are used in the truck?
We typically have several in the truck, but our bed will always have a sheet over the mattress and an extra sheet to cover a patient and a blanket, but we usually keep a bunch in our cabinet.
And are the sheets that are kept in the cabinet clean?
Yes.
In fact, every time you use a sheet on a patient, is it then reused or is it
It's a new
set down
sheet.
and clean?
When we drop off at the hospital, we leave our dirty linens and grab new linens there.
So any sheets that would have been used by you and Paramedic Chaffee, or any EMS personnel for that matter, would be clean sheets, correct?
If they were doing it right.
No, to the extent you know the answer, you may answer.
We always use clean sheets.
Can I approach the witness, sir?
You may.
So I'm going to show you two photographs. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph, sir?
That's the victim that I declared non-viable.
I'm going to ask it to be marked for identification.
F for identification.
Second photograph, sir. Do you recognize the individual depicted in that photograph?
It's the victim.
That's the individual you treated?
Well, declared non-viable.
Okay. And the positioning of his body at this point, is that a fair and accurate representation of the way you saw his body positioned as you were treating him?
As I recall.
Excuse me? We have an objection. Overruled.
Is it, sir?
Roughly, yes.
And you indicated that when you saw the individual before declaring him non-viable, his head was forward so you could see the wound in the back of the head. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that generally consistent, fair and accurately to what we see in that photograph there?
Yes.
Objections to the following question. Standard is not generally consistent.
Rephrase.
Is this the positioning of his head, is that consistent with the position of the head that you saw that night?
Yes.
And the positioning of his body as it sits in the seat there in that photograph I'd ask now to be marked for identification as the next letter you're on?
BG for identification.
The positioning of his body as seated in that photograph that's been marked for identification as the letter G, is that consistent with his positioning as you attempted to treat him that night?
Yes.
And the evidence of trauma that's seen on what's now been marked for identification as letter G, most notably the blood on the shirt of the individual, is that consistent with what you observed that night?
Yes.
Just going back to what's been marked for identification as a letter F, it's a little bit of a different angle of the individual, but is that a fair and accurate representation of, and consistent with the positioning of that he was sitting in when you treated him at the scene?
Yes.
For both photographs, the next number of exhibits previously labeled as G and F.
Counsel, any objection? I'm sorry?
We would have, yes, we would object, and I assume we would request to proceed similarly as the last witness did. Publishing after cross.
All right. Why don't we do that? You may offer them on redirect if appropriate.
So did you later learn the name of the individual you attempted to treat and declare non-viable?
Not that night, no.
You didn't have his name that night?
No.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Mr. Baden. Ms. Ford. Mr. Hagan. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, sir. I notice, do you have your reports with you today?
I have it on my phone.
Okay.
My phone's off, though.
Would it help you out if I handed you copies?
Sure.
May I approach the witness? Your Honor? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Absolutely.
Do those appear to be your reports, sir?
That's not mine. This one's mine.
This one's yours. Okay. Can you take a look at the narrative portion?
Yeah.
When you're done. Okay. Now, sir, in the narrative portion, you make it a point to state that you observed the injuries without moving the patient.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's important for you to know that you didn't move the patient, correct?
We try to preserve the crime scene as best as possible.
Right, and that was my next question. In order to preserve the integrity of the scene.
Yes.
Okay. When you placed the sheets, did you do that upon the instruction of any police officers?
Negative, and it wasn't sheets, it was just one.
Just one sheet. When you placed that sheet on there, did you do it at the direction of a police officer?
No,
Okay. And you only had one sheet.
correct.
And I was a bit confused with your direct examination. I want to clear that up. Did you take that off the bed of what was in the
It was our
ambulance?
one extra sheet in the truck.
Okay. So that was an extra sheet you had lying around.
Yes.
Okay. If I can look at the photos. I'd like to direct your attention to areas outside of the photo to see if you can indicate or see whether this photograph was taken at the scene or someplace else.
Mr. Baez, if you would just reference what
I'm sorry,
the items-
showing you Exhibit F and G.
That appears to be, could be asphalt, you know, and that looks about the same color.
Okay. Do you see some gentlemen and perhaps a garage door behind them?
Yeah,
That
so
photograph.
I see that, yeah.
Okay.
Looks like it's there too, is that it?
Yes. All right. Looking at photograph F, can you notice that the patient's head is almost out the window or out of the door?
Yes.
When you saw this patient, he did not have his head out the door, did he?
I don't recall. I opened the door, so it may have been.
Okay. Let's take another look at that real quick.
Yes, but I'm saying if his head was resting on the door, I would have.
And did you, when you opened the door, did his head come out?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. So you can't testify as to the accuracy of this position. Is that a yes? Because I saw you go like that.
Well, I can't testify that his head came out from me or after.
Okay. Yeah, just one thing. No further questions, thank you.
I'm welcome.
Just to clarify, sir, G and F, again, to the best of your recollection, are these fair and accurate representations of the positioning of his body in the seat when you saw him at the scene?
I believe so, yes.
Overruled.
I believe so, yes.
For these marked as F and G as the next number.
Let me see both of you at sidebar. That bed had been moved to a police garage and then unloaded for examination. And at that time, photographs were taken. And so please understand that these photographs depict or were actually taken at a later point in time after some movement of the vehicle. They're offered now relative to this witness's testimony as to what he observed at the original location. All right. Mr. Hagan, do you want to publish these?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, these photographs are graphic. They may be disturbing to view, and please examine them, understanding that they may obviously cause you some discomfort, but you are not allowed to allow any discomfort to affect your ability to remain fully fair and impartial and not to be influenced by any feelings of sympathy or other emotional response. Mr. Hagan.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Baez.
No, sir.
All right, sir, thank you. You may step down. Please watch your step.
Right this way, sir.
Mr. Hagan.
Member of the Commonwealth calls Todd Rich.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the matter now in hearing between the Commonwealth and the defendant at bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Todd Rich, R-I-T-C-H.
And what is your current occupation, or do you go to school?
Full-time student,
And prior to what are you studying as a full-time student, sir?
physician assistant program.
Prior to becoming a full-time student in a physician's assistant program, did you work for the Boston Emergency Medical Services as an emergency medical technician?
Yes,
How long did you have that job as an emergency medical technician?
8 years.
During that 8 years, did you receive any specialized training to become an EMT?
Yes, I did.
What type of training was that, sir?
A 6-month course to get certified as an EMT through Boston EMS and certified by the state.
So you actually had to pass a test with the state and become certified, is that correct, sir?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Rich, I'm calling your attention now to a particular incident or a call that you responded to. This would be Monday morning, July 16th, the year 2012, at approximately 2:30 in the morning. Were you working that night, sir?
Yes,
And were you working with a partner or alone?
I was working with a partner,
Who were you working with? What was his name or her name?
Edward Cook.
Is that C-O-O-K?
It is.
At some point, did you receive a radio call to respond to the area of Shawmut Street and Harold Street, Shawmut Ave and Harold Street in the south end of Boston?
Yes, I did.
And after 2:30 in the morning, when you received that call, about how long did it take for you to get there?
4 minutes.
Upon your arrival at the scene, were you the first Boston EMS, or were there other EMS units already there?
The deputy was on scene as well as paramedic 1.
What is the deputy's last name?
Bossy.
B-O-S-S-E?
That's correct.
Paramedic 1, is that paramedic, what are their names?
David Chaffee and Sean Murphy.
When you arrived at the scene, I'm calling your attention out of exhibit number 13. Is that a fair and accurate representation of the vehicle that you observed at the scene?
Yes.
And upon the arrival, where did you go and what did you do?
I exited the truck and approached the vehicle. After shortly observing the two gentlemen inside the vehicle, I was redirected by my deputy to a third patient on the other side of the vehicle.
What observations did you make of the two people in the vehicle?
Only that they were not moving and seemed to not be alert.
And when you were directed by your supervisor to an individual outside of the vehicle, where was he, sir?
To my recollection, he was on the sidewalk on the other side of the car, driver's side of the car.
Just placing exhibit 10 on the screen, sir, is the sidewalk that you're referring to, the driver's side, is that the area right here that I've marked on exhibit 10?
Yes.
And that's the sidewalk area?
Yes.
What observations did you make of this man, sir?
He was ambulatory, standing.
What does ambulatory mean?
He was standing up. He was alert and talking with the deputy at the time.
Did you notice any injuries on him, sir?
It was pointed out to me that he had an injury to his right arm.
And did you observe that injury?
I did.
And what did it appear to be?
He appeared to have two penetrating wounds, one posterior forearm and one anterior forearm.
Just for those who may not know, which one's posterior, which one's interior on the arm?
Holding your arm out to your side, thumb up, posterior is on the back side, and anterior is going to be the front side.
And on one of those two holes that you described seeing on that right arm, did you notice an object in either of those holes?
Yeah, there was an object on the interior wound that appeared to be a bullet.
And remind us again, which one's anterior here?
It's going to be here.
So on your forearm area.
Forearm.
And what did you see exactly there as far as a potential projectile?
It looked like a bullet. It was copper goldish colored. I couldn't tell you what part of the bullet it was.
Was it partially protruding from the skin?
Yes, slightly.
You could see it?
Yep.
And again, on the other side, you saw a hole, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, a penetrating wound there.
What was this patient's demeanor like, sir?
He seemed anxious.
Was he bleeding?
Very, very little. Only from the posterior penetrating wound, and only slightly.
And the posterior penetrating wound, again, is the opposite side of the forearm here.
Correct.
Did you treat him at scene, or did you take him to the hospital right away?
We placed him inside the truck on the stretcher, and I dressed his right arm with a gauze bandage, and then I took his vital signs, checked the remainder of his body for any other traumatic wounds, and then we transported him to Tufts Medical Center.
About how long did it take you to get to Tufts Medical Center?
1 minute.
Thank you, sir. No further... Well, actually, one more question. I'm sorry. The name of the patient that you treated, was that Aquilino Freire?
Yes.
And after taking him to the hospital, did you turn over his medical treatment to doctors at the hospital?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Baez. Oh, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rich.
Good
My
afternoon.
name is Linda Kenney, Baden. You and I have not met, but I'm one of the attorneys who represent Aaron Hernandez, okay?
Okay.
And you and I haven't spoken before, have we?
No.
Now, thank you for your duties as an EMT and being involved in patient safety. And I assume when you were examining Mr. Freire, you were worried about the traumatic wounds that he had, correct?
Yes.
And how do you as an EMT describe traumatic wounds?
It depends on the shape of the wound. There's different ways you can describe the way that there is a break in the skin.
Okay. Now, you said you examined him for traumatic wounds, and one of the things that had been pointed out to you was the detective pointed out to you that he had a wound on his right arm, correct?
The deputy,
Deputy.
for Boston EMS.
Okay, and who was that deputy?
Deputy Posse.
Okay. All right. Did you speak to a detective?
No.
Did any detective come up to speak to you?
No.
Did anyone inform you that Mr. Freire had stated to someone earlier that he had been shot in both arms?
Now, overruled. Were you told that?
I was not told that he was shot in both arms.
Did you follow up with Mr. Freire at the medical center?
No.
Did you learn whether he had been treated for a wound, a shotgun wound, or a wound in both arms?
No.
Do you know whether he had it all?
I don't understand that question.
Did anyone ever tell you whether or not Mr. Freire had been diagnosed as having two wounds, one in his right arm, one in his left arm?
No.
Do you know what a graze wound is?
Yes.
What is that?
It could be described as a object only briefly touching the skin and causing a superficial wound, break in the skin.
Did you note any superficial wounds on Mr. Freire?
No.
Did you know whether or not subsequent treatment did?
No.
If you had learned, or if you learned that subsequently, hypothetically, let's say at a hospital, that a patient you had examined had a second wound that you had not diagnosed, would that surprise you? Let me rephrase, Your Honor. Have you had a situation where you had missed a wound on somebody?
Yes.
Okay. And can you say without any doubt that the wound that you saw on Mr. Freer was the only wound?
No.
Thank you, sir.
Nothing further.
Nothing further.
Any redirect?
Just one quick question, Mr. Rich. When you say a graze wound, you said an object kind of scratches or touches the surface of the skin. Is that right?
Correct.
And is it fair to state that a graze wound isn't necessarily only a bullet? A graze wound can come from glass or any object.
Anything that can break any part of the skin, a fingernail, anything could have caused that.
So at least in the medical terminology, at least as you've been told, a graze wound is not exclusive to bullets, correct?
Yeah, we wouldn't use the term graze. We would just call it a
Abrasion?
superficial abrasion would be a good way to put it.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mr. Rich, if subsequent medical treatment of a patient you had indicated there was abrasion, it could also be a graze wound, correct?
Well, that would not be in my place to call it a graze wound.
So you just told Mr. Hagan that a graze wound could be a wound caused by glass or something else, correct?
Yes, we just don't use the term graze.
So you use the term abrasion.
Correct.
Okay. So that when you told this jury exactly what a graze wound is, a graze wound to you and a graze wound to a medical doctor may be two different things, correct?
Objection.
No, you may explain your use of the term.
If I was to use the term graze wound, I would use it in terms of a bullet specifically, something grazing the skin as it goes by at a high velocity.
Good.
If I was to determine that it was a superficial abrasion, that's how I would document it.
Just 1 second. Thank you.
And sir, I may have missed it, but the wounds you saw in the anterior and posterior of an arm, which arm was that?
It was the right arm.
The right arm. Okay. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth calls Robert Devlin.
So you're going to stop right here, and raise your right hand, and face the Madam Clerk.
You solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the matter now in hearing between the Commonwealth and the defendant at bar shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes. I just return.